Samvaad is an Ukaalo venture that looks to break down how Nepal looks at the world and what the future holds for us as Nepalis. In the first season, Nepal and the World, writer Alisha Mulmi will talk to experts through 6 episodes covering history, economic diplomacy, the Nepali diaspora, the Himalayas, our heritage, and our foreign policy. Here, he'll discuss the opportunities the world will present to us and the challenges we'll face.
Namaste. Welcome to Samvaad, an Ukaalo podcast where we want to break down how Nepal looks at the world and what the future holds for us as Nepalis. My name is Amisha Rajmulmi and I will be your host for the podcast. I'm very excited about today's episode because we're going to talk about a subject that is very close to my heart, which is our heritage. Recently, 4 sculptures from the 16th and 17th centuries were repatriated from American museums to Nepal after a lengthy campaign. And we know they will not be the last. So far, 145 artifacts have been repatriated, but it's estimated that more than 100,000 Nepali artifacts, including sculptures, paintings, manuscripts, jewelry, are believed to be scattered around the world's museums and in private collections. My 2 personal favorites, such as there's an extraordinary 14 feet long 18th century cloth painting in the Philadelphia Museum that shows a pilgrimage to Gosaikon from Kathmandu. There's in the Art Institute of Chicago has a 17th century necklace of the Taleju, one that when the news broke out in Nepal, it grew great social media ire, and one that the museum lists, and I'm not joking here, as a gift to the museum from the Alstorf Foundation. Now in this episode, I want to discuss how we can bring our gods back home, how we can turn our heritage into a tool of diplomacy, and what exactly do we mean when we say heritage in Nepal. And to do that, I have with us 2 guests who have both worked hard to shine a light on our stolen heritage and give new meaning to our cultures in a new era. I want to begin by talking about a recent paper by Emmeline Smith and Erin Thompson, which suggested that Mary Slusar, the famous scholar for Nepali cultural scholar, which suggested her complicity in heritage trafficking, which Charles Ramble, another scholar, has now rebutted. But the fact is that almost every item in museums of the West and richer countries labeled under Nepal has been illicitly taken out of the country. So I want to come to you, Alisha, and just ask about how do we think about heritage in Nepal? And can we incorporate heritage into our diplomacy, seeing that repatriation, the work of heritage recovery, is currently is driven by the community through social media awareness and activism? And can we turn our heritage into a soft power that helps us bring these works back? What has been your experience?
Thank you, Amish. We all know that Nepal was open from 1950s and the Western started coming in and everything started getting stolen. And there's also been cases where we've been told that the communities themselves have been involved in getting these gods out for economic reasons. That's one. And then I don't know if everyone would agree with me, but अहिले चाहिँ heritage has been given that emphasis. Heritage articles, culture articles, back page stories. It was never front page stories. So when it started getting front page emphasis पाएपछि चाहिँ, then people also started noticing heritage. I think heritage चाहिँ 2015 earthquake को बेला होला, it was always out there on the front pages, like, oh, हाम्रो heritage preserve गर्नुपर्छ, this, that, भनेर. But अहिले चाहिँ all of a sudden, I think past 2 or 3 years, it has started picking up and front pages मा चाहिँ आउन थाल्यो. So the recent Rubin Museum बाट जुन mask आयो, Rubin Museum, Dallas Museum of Art बाट, that was in every front page. तर पहिला when there were only, I would say, Devendra Bhattarai from Kantipur were doing the stories, and I was one of them from Nepali Time. And very, very few journalists like Ashish Mishra, Sabina Devkota, they were doing these stories. But त्यति बेलातिर त्यो स्टोरीजलाई पनि मूर्ति चोरीको स्टोरीज, हेरिटेज स्टोरीज गर्ने बेलातिर पनि can you please reshare our stories? Can you retweet our stories भन्नु पर्थ्यो. There was a time when I had to beg my friends, can you please do it भनेर. अब अहिले आएर चाहिँ for media to get okay, editors to understand, use the front page जानुपर्छ है. That I think that is a big jump to how we see that. And also अहिले चाहिँ social media played a big, massive role. Because I would say that repatriation त पहिलादेखि नै कुरा भइरहेको थियो, कसरी फिर्ता लिएर आउने, के गर्ने, तर nobody knew how to navigate through it. Government च्यानलबाट कसरी जाने सबैलाई थाहा थियो, चोरी भएको छ बाहिर छ, तर nobody knows कसरी चोरी भयो, के भयो, कस्तो भयो. But अब अहिले आएर चाहिँ things have finally, even the government has taken that step. If the government would not have been proactive, हाम्रो भगवानहरू फिर्ता आउँदैन थियो. And it's got a lot to do with social media playing its role. And it was from Lakshmi Narayan statue जुन Dallas Museum of Art मा भेटाएको. I think that was one precedent case for us where Joylyn Davis, she was involved, the artist Joylyn Davis, and Erin Thompson. So Erin Thompson went on social media, on Twitter, that यो मूर्ति यस्तो भयो, and she went on threads with it. But then all of a sudden, it started picking up.
हाम्रो गभर्मेन्टले चाहिँ कस्तो रोल खेलिरहेछ? Like, do you think it's social media driven, like you said, and therefore that pressure is helping them work towards it? Or do you think it's also something that the government is realizing on its own as well?
Well, when I think 2019 Lakshmi Narayan ko murti आएपछि चाहिँ there was pressure भन्दा पनि the community ko people in Potkotol, in Lakshmi Narayan, they were very proactive about it. They wanted their gods back. So त्यो भए चाहिँ when the community is active, social media ले जति pressure दिए पनि unless the community is active, त्यो pressure हुँदैन government लाई. So when community took the initiative themselves, त्यो पछि चाहिँ okay यसरी गर्नुपर्छ. But how do we go about it? That was the challenge. And I think मैले personally चाहिँ I saw those challenges when I was working on Denver Art Museum मा भेटाएको मूर्ति उमा महेश्वर. And okay, how do we bring it back? Because Lakshmi Narayan ठ्याक्क त्यति बेला 2021 मा Joylyn had told us that okay, I think it's coming back to Nepal भनेर. And we knew it was अब चाहिँ आउन लाग्यो in couple of months. So त्यो पछि चाहिँ Lost Arts of Nepal, the anonymous social media page, we all got in touch and then back and forth huna thalyo. And I think that was an interesting case, like getting in touch with Lost Arts of Nepal and coming up with stories, because Lost Arts of Nepal was there for a long time on social media, but I think once social media ma pick up bhayepachi chai, once the articles started coming out, then things started going straight. Because हामीले social media मा or मैले report लेखेर मात्र ओ मूर्ति फर्किने होइन. There has to be a whole battalion behind. If Department of Archaeology ले report बनाएन भने त्यो report Ministry of Culture, त्यो report Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then it goes to embassies बाहिर. There's a whole case छ there, I mean process, hierarchy नै छ. So how it goes. So हामीले जति पनि we want it back भनेर हुँदैन. The Department of Archaeology has to make a report, has to do their own research. त्यो पछि मात्र it goes. हामीले त will do our work, but that is not enough. The government has to do it, or even Interpol has to get involved. नत्र यतिकै चाहिँ हुँदैन. And I think हामीले जहिले पनि be very quick to judge the government. But यो केसमा चाहिँ if Department of Archaeology would not have been proactive, हामीले रिपोर्ट गर्यो, प्रेसर पनि थियो at the same time. So त्यो भएपछि चाहिँ काम अगाडि चाँडो बढ्यो.
That's an interesting view. I want to come to you, Swosti. अब अलिशाले भने जस्तै after 2015 को quake पछि एउटा heritage को sort of people started getting more interested about the fact that heritage was being lost, and then recently also went to Changunaran. I don't know if you've been restoration boy, but I believe it was also restored locally with local efforts, a community effort. We've also seen the post-earthquake heritage reconstruction. It had its own politics of like displays, of own politics of let's say who is getting what. Lumbini master plan, it's been in limbo for over 40 years. So I just want to get a sense, Hamro heritage preservation, do you think we emphasize more towards donors? Do we where do you see this disconnect? Hamro heritage, Hamro culture, Hamro restoration? Isko bitsa
Nepal, we call ourselves a cultural space. We sell cultural tourism, etc. But the ministry under which culture is it is Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Civil Aviation. And civil aviation, that takes a chunk of the minister's time, and then tourism, and then culture is the last in the focus. So in that way, culture is not getting as much importance, and the prime time, the prime energy and the effort of the government. That's what I truly feel, and I think many people also agree with me. So I think if we could somehow make a change in that, and that if civil aviation could go to transport or something, it would probably help, because culture is such an integral part. And according to my research, Nepal is the first country in Asia to be enlisted in the World Heritage Site in 1979. So in Asia. So at that time, if we were enlisted, in the UNESCO World Heritage Site, we have something to show to the world, right? UNESCO World Heritage Sites are are cultural properties for everybody, they say. It's not only for the country. So we have so much that we can share to the world, but I think from our side, we need to give it more importance, and about taking care, whether we depend on donors or whether we can do it ourselves. I'm not an economist, so I don't know exactly what the budget of our country, etc., holds. But like Bhaktapur, post the 2015 earthquake, they managed to reconstruct and renovate everything by themselves. So why can't other places also do it? Maybe there is a budget limitation, but then Bhaktapur sets a very good example as to we can do it ourselves. But every other country gets foreign aid. It's not only Nepal that's getting foreign aid for different purposes. So I think there's a way to balance between the two.
That's an interesting idea, that to have a balance, because obviously we know that the first restoration projects here were carried out by, let's say, foreign cultural architects. So to balance, my fairy, do you also see that there is an emphasis mostly on the prime sites inside the valley? Obviously, why wasn't the similar attention given to Changunarayan? What do you think is that reason? Okay?
No, Changunarayan was given attention, because that is the place that we have our first dated inscription, 464, and our archaeological history begins from there. So Changunarayan was given importance. In fact, when I went there straight after the earthquake, it was all protected by the army and the police, etc. But as you say, like far west, the north, I think it needs to decentralize the protection of our cultural heritage. I think the focus is on Kathmandu Valley more, because in terms of the Cultural World Heritage Site, Kathmandu Valley and Lumbini are the Cultural World Heritage Sites of Nepal, and the natural is Sagarmatha and Chitwan National Park. So to stay in the World Heritage Site, you have to abide by certain rules and regulations and certain criterias. I think to live up to that, the focus stays here.
I also agree with what Swosti said, because I think when the election happened, 2022. Yeah, so I'd written an opinion piece in Nepali Times, like culture should not be an afterthought. And like Ministry of Tourism, Civil Aviation, culture last bouncer, and Department of Archaeology pani, as I don't know if many people know, but Singadarbar, it was in the premises of Singadarbar. The Jalepachi National Archives ko building ma Department of Archaeology raheko ho, so Department of Archaeology ko, it's just a temporary space, permanent space ta haina, but that also shows the importance of Nepal's archaeology and archives. So because सबैको लागि infrastructure छ, त्यो सिंहदरबार जलेपछि Department of Archaeology मा चाहिँ अब it's not their space originally, it's archives को space हो त्यो, but Department of Archaeology is there. But त्यहाँ पनि देख्छ कि हाम्रो importance of archaeology heritage कहाँ चाहिँ पर्छ. अब इभन हाम्रो लज रेगुलेसन्समा पनि हेऱ्यो भने एन्सियन्ट मोन्युमेन्ट प्रिजर्भेसन एक्ट भन्यो नेसनल म्युजियम भन्यो एन्ड इन टर्म्स अफ टकिङ अबाउट बजेट द्याट्स अ मेजर हर्डल बिकज एभ्री टाइम वी गो टु नेसनल म्युजियम यो किन भएन यो किन यस्तै राख्नु भएको छ अब यति नै पैसा दिन्छ हामीलाई यतिमै जोगाउनुपर्छ हामीले होइन एन्ड द्याट इज अ भेरी स्याड पार्ट बिकज मिनिस्ट्री अफ कल्चर डिपार्टमेन्ट इज द कल्चर युनिट इज द लास्ट बजेटमा टुरिज्म सिभिल एभिएसन लास्टमा पर्छ त्यसमा पनि अब डिपार्टमेन्ट अफ आर्कियोलोजी अन्डर देयर इज ओन्ली वान डिपार्टमेन्ट अफ आर्कियोलोजी अनि पछि काठमाडौँमै स्टेसन छ अरू होल अफ नेपालमा छैन and that becomes a very, very difficult task because many people think that Kathmandu is Nepal, but that is not the case. And we need to see beyond Kathmandu. And the government, especially the ministry and the ministries, Ministry of Culture and Ministry of Finance, has to see that heritage and culture is important. And त्यो नहेरेसम्म त हामीले कम्प्लेन गर्नु बाहेक अरू केही ठाउँै छैन द गभर्मेन्ट निड्स टु एक्ट अप एन्ड यु क्यान ब्लेम दोज पिपल वर्किङ इन डिपार्टमेन्ट अफ आर्कियोलोजी इट्स द पिपल हु गिभ्स द मनी एट द एन्ड अफ द डे
No, that's absolutely right. And I think the one part that we were talking about before we started this podcast was also how it is easy to criticize here, but it's not actually really like, I mean, we tend to sort of blow up, let's say, controversies around issues, right? Like, for instance, we saw one that was happening recently around Itumbahago Museum and the Rubin Museum's role in it. Today, the Rubin Museum has suddenly decided that it will shut down its New York space. It's pivoting to a global model of exchange and circulation. You know, yes, of course, at least a few international museums have acknowledged and repatriated heritage that is proven to have stolen. So this is a two-parter question. I know the first is, in your roles, have you seen international museums acknowledge their role not just in illicit trafficking, but also in not supporting preservation efforts in countries where their collections come from? And the second part is this link between colonialism and museum collections, especially, let's say, over South Asia, could relate with the British Museum. Do you think these countries should be held more responsible towards the presence of such artifacts, and how can we engage with them better? So how do you, I think, Alisha, you want to take the first part?
Recently, between 2022 and 23, the Rubin Museum did express their wish to support any community heritage in Nepal. And I was in touch with them, and at that time they were repatriating the Apsara, which they call, but I think it's called the Vidyadhar here locally, the architectural part below the window of Itumbahal's monastery. And so they expressed that wish of theirs for me. And while doing the research for this object with the Itumbahal community, when I met them first, they asked me, who are you? You know, because they didn't want too many journalists, because a lot of objects have been lost from Itumbahal, and they have had many years of talking to journalists, including the CBI, etc. So they asked me who I was. So I said that at that time I was teaching museum studies. So I said in Nepali, ma Sangrale Bigyan padaunchu. And they said, Sangrale Bigyan, testo pani subject huncha, and then tyo pani Nepal ma padauncha. And then I told them that, and then they said, hamlai Sangrale banauna help garnu huncha. So before even I could talk about what I had come for, I had to, answer all their questions about Sangrale banaunu ke chahincha, kaso garnu sakincha, and how I would support, because they wanted to make a proposal to give to the government and receive a funding to open a museum. So, and they said that this was in 2021 or late 2020, I'm not too sure. They said that यो चाहिँ हाम्रो 20 वर्षदेखिको सपना थियो. So that sapna was incubated in between 2002 and 2004 when Itumbal was majorly restored by KPVT. And at that time, these gentlemen who are now looking after the Itumbaha, they were 20 years younger, in their mid-40s. So they were helping to, put away all the objects that were scattered everywhere because the whole building was being brought down and rebuilt. And they had to literally stuff them in sacks. Because what is our culture, whether in Nepal, whether it's Hinduism or Buddhism, people make donations, people make offerings. And what do we do with these offerings? If they are needed for the daily rituals, we use them. If they are not, then they go up to the store. And then somebody writes it in a ledger that this person donated this. And that's it. There's no photo documentation. And the stores are just filled and filled and filled and filled. And nobody has a record of what is there or any idea of what is there. So all these objects that had accumulated over time, these objects were now they were trying to store them away. So then they realized that एउटा हाम्रो संग्रहालय भयो भने किनभने त्यो त daily rituals को सामान नै होइन, they don't need those objects. So but then they cannot sell them because it's a property, the community property, right? Somebody donated them. So therefore they thought that हाम्रो एउटा museum भयो भने चाहिँ कति राम्रो हुन्थ्यो. So since then they had been striving to make a museum, but then for whatever reasons they said that कसैले हामीलाई एउटा proposal बनाइदिनलाई कतिजना मान्छेसँग reach out गर्यौं तर हामीलाई हरायो मान्छेहरू. तपाई त हराउनुहुन्न, they asked me. I said म त हराउँदिन, this is my card, I work at the university, you can call the university to reach me if I get lost भनेर. When the Itumbal people, they asked me whether I would support them make a museum, then I asked them, your whole Bihar is like a museum. Why do you want a museum? And then they said that they had a plethora of objects in their storage. And the other reason was that they said, they gave me three reasons. One was that they had, ample objects just stored. Nobody even sees them. So that can, be used for research. For various kinds of research purposes. The other was they wanted their younger generation, their own community's younger generation, and the larger community to be interested in their heritage. And the third, they said that Itumbal is such a prime monastery of Kathmandu, being one of the biggest also. And like in ancient days, people stayed around the monastery and then they conducted their social and daily lives also based around the monastery. But then now people have, migrated. So there are very few people. And when their friends as tourist guides, they come to Itumbahal bringing tourists, it's always locked because they have to lock it during the day. So त्यो नहुनको लागि they said if हामीले म्युजियम खोल्यो भने किनभने हामी का सामान धेरै छ अनि म्युजियम खोल्यो भने टुरिस्टहरु बहाल मात्र हेर्दैन हाम्रो स्टोरमा राखेको सामानहरु पनि हेर्छ. So these were the three reasons that they had given me. They said they didn't have the money. So and here the Rubin Museum wanted to give, they did not say money, they said support, So then I asked them that then I thought, oh, why can I connect instead of looking beyond, because here somebody wants something and there somebody is willing to give something. I thought maybe I can connect them both. So I asked the Itumbahal people, I said, Rubin Museum le support garna चाहनुहुन्छ तपाईहरु like केही support चाहिन्छ? They said कस्तो support? I said, then I asked them, Kostas, what kind of support? They said the community has to say what kind of support. So then when I asked them, they said हामीलाई त actually finances चाहिराखेको हो यो museum बनाउनलाई. And so that was how the connection began. It was not Rubin Museum's idea to make a museum. It was not their museum. This was a 2-decade-long dream that was finally being realized. So then I think this was the first project where a Western museum did support for the conservation and preservation of our heritage.
So talking about your Itumba and Rubin whole controversy that happened. So it was मेरो thesis ko chapter where I spoke to Swosti, I spoke to Yurit, I spoke to the community people and whoever were involved. So what I realized, what I felt over the course of my 2 years while I was doing my master's in cultural heritage studies is that culture and heritage are something that it evolves over time. And you have to rethink, okay, how do you want to go forward with it? And who's responsible for that? Who's responsible for it to evolve? And it's the community. It's not bairako manche. I cannot go Ritumba and tell them, ki yo garo, tyo garo bhanera. That is not my responsibility. My job as a civilian is to support what they want. It is not हामीले गएर pressure गर्ने हैन उनीहरुलाई हैन. So जब Rubin Museum ले okay, we'll come into it. Okay, in all fairness, Rubin Museum को पनि आफ्नो issues छ. Keeping aside that, the government, the Department of Archaeology and responsible stakeholders, they knew Itumba wanted financial support to conserve and preserve that place भनेर. त्यति बेलातिर चाहिँ why didn't they step up in these past 20 years? But when Rubin came up with okay, help गर्ने भनेर एक वर्ष अगाडि प्रेस रिलिज त गरेको हो. एक वर्ष अगाडि प्रेस रिलिज गरे उनीहरूले that we coming up with this. त्यति बेले Department of Archaeology, they went for lunch at Dwarikas with Rubin Museum. They knew what was happening. Everybody knew what was happening. त्यति बेले even the public knew. News ta aeko ho ni. They should have stepped up त्यति बेला हैन. But when it जब त्यो खोल्ने भन्यो and all of that, त्यति बेलातिर चाहिँ I think it was too late for the protest. Yes, Rubin Museum is no dutule हैन. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge what is right, what is wrong. But if Rubin Museum नआएको भए कसले चाहिँ आएर गर्थ्यो? त्यो हामीले त्यो बाट पनि हेर्नुपर्छ. एन्ड अर्को कुरा इटुम्बाले जसरी काम गर्छ, जे पनि गर्छ, हामीले आफ्नो ओपिनियन दिने बाहेक हामीले के गर्न सक्दैन. बिकज इट इज देयर हेरिटेज. इट इज नट at the end of the day, it is not my heritage. It is their heritage and they have the full authority to decide what they want to do. And however, पछि गएर they say, इटुम्बा भत्काउने या के गर्नु भने हामीले गएर के भन्न मिल्दैन. प्रोटेस्ट होला, but at the end of the day, the community decides. It's not even मूर्ति चोरीको केसमा पनि, how I see it, country versus community. हैन? If whenever हामीले मूर्ति हेटाउँछौँ, okay, it's proven stolen, we go to the community and ask them के गर्ने कसो गर्ने भनेर. Then त्यो पछि अथोरिटीले डिसाइड गर्नुपर्छ. If the community says we don't want it back, then okay, it goes to the National Museum, right? But at the end of the day, at the heart of it is the community that matters. Mera chai, that is my take.
So just taking upon Alisha's what she mentioned, she was asking why Nepal government le paisa diena unarlai. So actually, I just want to touch upon a very funny incident that happened with Itumbal when they requested for money, and our understanding of preservation, our understanding of museums. So they did go to Kathmandu Nagarpalika and they said that they requested for finances to open a museum. And then the then mayor told them, because they apparently had been contemporaries and maybe school friends or childhood friends, and so he told them that तिमीहरुलाई 1 crore allocate गरिदिएको छु भनेर. So when they went to receive it, it was to construct a building, and they didn't want to construct a building because that was not their purpose. They didn't want to open a brand new museum. They wanted to open a museum for those 3 reasons inside their Bihar, as they expressed. So they couldn't take that money. So it was a funny incident, but then it just shows our lack of understanding as to why wasn't it asked to them that for what do you want the money? Museum ta kholne, tara museum ma ke गर्ने, भवन बनाउने, सामान संरक्षण गर्ने, museum भन्ने बित्तिकै भवन नै सोच्छ हामीहरु. So that is a very wrong thinking.
No, that's an interesting point, Swosti, that you raised. I know. Across the world, Louvre, British Museum, they get millions and millions of visitors every year. Like you said, they have their own issues in terms of, let's say, colonialism, colonial histories, let's say, stolen heritage. But of course, I am pretty certain that there is something that we can learn from them, right? Like, what do you think we can learn or unlearn from museums in the West about our heritage? How do we preserve them? Do you think, private sector preservation is an alternative in countries like ours where we don't have the money, like you said? What do you think?
Yeah, private sector preservation can definitely happen in museums, in hotels, in whatever way the community wants them to. And what we can learn from museums outside is about the importance of museums being an education center. Museums are not collection centers. In Nepal, the whole concept of museums are still as collection centers. And now why is this happening? Now, if we want to go a little bit into the depth, it is because, according to my thinking and my understanding and my research, why I think this is happening is because why museums have not been able to evolve from centers of collection like that of the 20th century, why early 20th century, why Nepali museums have not been able to evolve is because we don't have a document called the Museum Policy. The museums follow the Ancient Monument Preservation Act, the policy of the Ancient Monument Preservation Act, where museums ko lagi त्यति धेरै provisions and policies and laws and bylaws haru छैन. So who works in a museum? हाम्रो म्युजियम्समा now we are in the 21st century. Curator भन्ने position छैन, museum educator भन्ने position छैन. All these things have to come through a policy, and that is the most needed document for the museums to rise above being centers of collection. I think that is the most important thing that we need to do, is to know that museums are not collection centers, they are centers for education and recreation.
What I would like to emphasize on the part is that the Ancient Monument Preservation Act of 1956 has to be rewritten, re-revised, whatever it is, all over again, because the 1956 ma bhaneko थियो, which was almost a copy of Archaeological Survey of India act. But we are different countries at the end of the day. And त्यो act बनेको थियो when British India was no longer British India, when India got independent. हाम्रो country is not India, and त्यति बेला त्यसरी सोच्नु पर्थ्यो. अब अहिले पनि when you look at the Ancient Monument Preservation Act, भगवान like a heritage भन्ने word लाई पनि it's more like a curio object. It's also हामीले आफैले नै हाम्रै पेपर, हाम्रै एक्टमा हाम्रो भगवानलाई curio object भनेर लेख्यो भने how does that sound? Because to the world we're like, oh, this is our God, we're fighting for it to bring it back. But in our act, I'm like a curio object, archaeological object, and I think that needs to change. And yes, they are working on it, and it's nice thing that they're working on it, but I think अझ law र act चाहिँ हुनु पर्छ, I feel, because for instance मूर्ति चोरी भयो, अब हाम्रो देशमा त भ्यालुएसन हुँदैन नि, बाहिर पो त भ्यालुएसन हुन्छ यसको कति हो भनेर. But यहाँतिर someone steals it. I think there was one particular case, हाम्रो usually meetingsमा discussion हुन्छ यसको बारेमा. So there was एउटा चोर थियो, so कोर्टमा गयो, अब now the judge does not know यो मूर्तिको भ्यालुएसन के गर्ने भनेर, अब 2 करोड 3 करोड, because at the end of the day भगवानमा त price tag हुँदैन नि. So the judge was very confused and stuck. अब के गर्ने, कसरी चाहिँ अब compensation कसरी गर्ने, कति वर्ष जेल पुर्याउने हैन. अब that becomes a problem right there, because for us यो त सोच्दै नसोचेको कुरा थियो नि, यो पनि चोरी हुन्छ भनेर. But then it's time that everything needs to be revised and rework on museum policies, heritage, tangible heritage, intangible heritage. And interestingly, intangible heritage the UNESCO list mein chaina hamro, and there are people who worked on it, but certain phase पछि त्यो intangible heritage list जुन छ UNESCO's मा नेपालको के छदै नै छैन. And is that embarrassing? I don't know, but do people need to work on it? Yes.
No, that's the interesting part. I know, like you said, so many things need to be updated, our view of heritage. And I think त्यो Mary Sluicerको जुन त्यो critique आयो त्यसमा चाहिँ Charles Ramble, something similar he argues, where he says that the inflation, here I quote, the inflation of the commercial value of antiquities may well be the result of competition among international buyers but their traffic depends on the willingness of people to subscribe to the commoditization of their heritage and of their or of their neighbors to steal it, and of the government to fail to prevent it from leaving the country. The point is, this commerce cannot be simplified to the culpability of an individual. It is a system. And I think, like you said, Alisha, until we learn from these ideas, right? Like until we learn to evolve both the idea of heritage, both the idea of culture, these sort of views will keep coming back that illicit trafficking मा चाहिँ जुन community हो उसकै सबभन्दा पहिला fault हुन्छ अथवा उसकै सबभन्दा पहिला mistake हुन्छ. What do you think on this?
Do you say I don't agree with Charles Ramble, because first his whole paper is just rambling. This title of the paper is Cancel Culture Coming to Himalayan Studies. First, his whole paper, he has cancelled Erin Thompson and Emmeline Smith. And then Himalayan Studies word only comes towards the conclusion. So while I was reading the paper, the one thing that I realized, and even what you just mentioned about, when I did my thesis, the circle of repatriation, is my focus was not on मूर्ति फिर्ता लिएर आएपछि मूर्ति कसरी फिर्ता लिएर आउनुपर्छ भन्दा नि ओके फिर्ता लिएर आए हाउ डु वी वर्क अन कम्प्लिटिङ द सर्कल इज इट गोज ब्याक टु द कम्युनिटी बिकज कम्युनिटीबाट चोरी भएको कम्युनिटीमै फिर्ता जानुपर्छ एट द एन्ड अफ द डे त कति प्रायः केसेस हाम्रो केसेसमा इफ यु लुक रिड मेरी स्लुसरको आर्टिकल्स हर पर्सनल डायरिज एन्ड अल अफ दोज थिङ्स द्याट these people, they didn't know कि यो पनि चोरी हुन्छ भने त्यति बेला हाम्रो लिटरेसी रेट कति थियो 1950s मा. They didn't know because people started coming in, though they thought it's good, you give some dollars and then you become rich overnight, and people thought that this is a good way to earn money. But त्यो sense थिएन, heritage protection को sense थिएन त्यति बेला. For them, economic reasons were more important for them because we were a very poor country and we were just evolving then. But you cannot blame that on the community at the end of the day also, because first the bhakkari sikirako थियो के हो भनेर, and then second, when people like well educated people were coming and saying okay we want this यो गर त्यो गर भनेपछि त the herd mentality जुन हुन्छ एकजनाले गर्यो so rest of them also start doing it. And I'm not going to blame the community because the government is also equally responsible for it. त्यो चोरी हुनमा चोरी लिएर जानमा. And then the Art Institute of Chicagoको तलेजु necklace is a very good example that हाम्रो government during the 70s they were irresponsible and they knew what was happening, the government then. So I would blame the system. Yes, I'd blame the system at that time because 1956 को लॉ आइसकेको थियो त त्यति बेला एन्शियन्ट मोन्युमेन्ट प्रिजर्भेसन एक्टमा कि until the permission of His Majesty केही कुरा पनि archaeological objects, double quote, archaeological object cannot go out of the country भनेर रुल्स त थियो, लज त थियो, why weren't they followed? And त्यति बेलातिर त न्युज पनि त आएको थियो कि चोरी भयो यस्तो भयो भनेर. when the necklace was asked के रे तलेजु भवानीको मन्दिरबाट जब त्यो नेक्लेस सबै तलेजुको जति पनि ज्वेलरीहरू छ अब चाहिँ अर्को ठाउँमा शिफ्ट गर्ने भनेपछि एन्ड त्यहाँको पुजारीहरू दे प्रोटेस्टेड हुँदैन यस्तो गर्न भनेर. पछि गएर चेक गर्ने बेला इन्भेन्ट्री चेक गर्ने बेलातिर त छैन. हु वाज रिस्पोन्सिबल फर इट? द गभर्मेन्ट वाज रिस्पोन्सिबल फर इट होइन. एन्ड आई डु ब्लेम द गभर्मेन्ट एट द्याट टाइम द्याट दे वर भेरी इरेस्पोन्सिबल. एन्ड अब कसै भन्दै भने इभन वेन यु रिड मेरी स्लुसरको आर्टिकल्समा अर्ट जर्नल्स सी इज मेन्सन यस्तो खालीको मान्छेले चाहिँ साइकलमा डोराएर लिएर आउँथ्यो स्टचहरू, यस्तो मान्छेले चाहिँ she's never mentioned names. She's never mentioned how she took all these things out. And she may be a very celebrated historian, cultural historian, but she very well knew she was also in the system. We cannot let go of the fact that she wasn't in the system. She was also part of the system. Yes, sure, you celebrate her, but you cannot deny the fact that she wasn't a part of the system. that's that.
I would also emphasize that we already had the Cultural Heritage Preservation Act in 1956, which not only bars traveling of our archaeological objects outside the country, but from district to district also. Actually, if you read it, you cannot even take it from one district, from Kathmandu to Patan pani lana mildaina. So, UNESCO's Act on Cultural Illicit Trafficking only came in 1970s. So our thoughts were active, but why wasn't it implemented? So it's a vicious circle, So as Alisha said, the community, when you see photographs of Nepal of 1970s, 1980s, 1985, someone pani, like people were, I think 70s tira education bharkar, it was being realized. So testo mindset ko people sanga chahi, how could somebody as educated as Mary Slessor, when she came here, she was already a PhD holder. And I like to take the argument by Erin and Emmeline that she could have supported the preservation of these cultural artifacts in the country and not outside.
I think that's a very interesting point that you made, that she could have supported here as well. Alisha, you were saying?
Actually, they have mentioned in the article,
So, Mary Slessor, like also, Charles Ramble, like, he's gone on saying that, they've only particular case, Mary Slessor, like, personally attacked her. It is not personal attack. These are facts. That, like, kati kurama chahi hola, they went a little too far, but most of them, there is also kurani, they're facts. Because when this is our New South Wales gallery butter, June wooden struts Salabanjika ayo from Ratneshwar Temple, Patanko, Sulima. So when we were speaking, negotiating, when we were having conversations with New South Wales gallery, and we have proof ki yo ठाउँको हो, east right ठाउँकै हो के अरे त्यो strut. So we want it back, and then we received an email saying that the Kathmandu, we knew कि यो चाहिँ यो ठाउँको हो, हामीलाई पहिलादेखि नै थाहा थियो. We were trying to get in touch with somebody, then we got in touch with somebody from Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust, and त्यति बेला कुरा चाहिँ के भयो, now it's better that it should be in the gallery in New South Wales, and then when I asked who was it from Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust, and it was Mary Slessor, who was in the board then, and she does not have the authority. She may be a celebrated cultural historian, expert, but at the end of the day, she's not the authority to decide ki, or like I would say Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust pani authority ma haina, Mary Slessor ta hundai haina. त्यो if त्यस्तो information थियो भने that information should have gone to the government, to the department, and the community as well.
But
the community,
they want it back.
Yeah, and the country, I would say the community and the country decides. And हामी civiliansले support गर्ने हो, push गर्ने हो, but Mary Slessor has no authority to tell New South Wales Gallery कि you keep it अहिले, because Nepal does not have the capacity to bring it back भनेर. Nobody has that authority to say it. The community and then the country decides. Nobody else can decide. As personally, मैले पनि कुनै museum or gallery लाई भन्न मिल्दैन कि keep it भनेर. That is beyond me. I have to talk to authorities. पछि गएर आफू फस्ने कुरा पनि हुन्छ त्यसमा.
No, I think your Ramble paper, as you said, cancel culture coming to Himalayan studies. I like how he claims Himalayan studies as this massive domain where only they can decide, like, people from the West can decide what exactly does it sort of contain, So I come to my last question. Again, both of you coming to Himalayan studies, Himalaya ko kura bhayihalyo, like you said at the beginning, we think Nepali heritage is Kathmandu Valley ko heritage, बिचमा कहिले कहिले लुम्बिनी आइदिन्छ because Buddha was born in Nepal, But what about Jumla, or Simrangarh? Or let's say, I know that Emmeline Smith last year, she documented Dolbogo monastery to theft pani bhairacha. We know Lomandhangबाट पनि त्यहाँ मुस्ताङको monasteries are also in a very bad state of preservation, of theft pani bhairacha. So I want to just get a sense as a concluding thought, okay? How do we expand the definition of heritage to include the whole of Nepal? I know we have a rich history, not just Kathmandu Valley, but also across. And what does Nepal need to do, let's say, to think about these things from not just a Kathmandu perspective? How do we, let's say, decentralize the idea of heritage in Nepal? Who wants to? Swosti?
The first thing that we need to do as the government or people involved in this sector, working whether with institutions individually, we need to document, photo documentation. It's not only heritage sites, but people in their personal collections also, they have very, very ancient cultural objects with them, because hamro culture but we inherit, we don't just give away and all, we inherit. And so the first thing that we should do is, I think the most important thing to do is documentation. So then what does documentation help us do is it helps us to save our objects and protect them from further trafficking, because once an object is trafficked and if it lands up in some country abroad, you can only claim it if you have, proper resources of documentation that it belongs to you. And why will anybody else also give it, if you can't show proper research of its identity or its belonging. So that is, I think, the prime importance. And also at Jumla and these places, I heard that at Sinja Jumla, they were making a museum, I heard. So I hope the museum actually, does a proper documentation of the objects and displays them well. So I think the prime importance right now is documentation, scientific documentation.
So going back to your question is, I don't know if you watched Steve Chow's documentary, Al Jazeera, 2017-18, where Chiring Bishta from Mustang, he's been taking photographs in Mustang monasteries. But this is it, we have to preserve it. At least photo khicha bhane chai chori nahola. Simrangarh is a very, very sad case, but fortunately, with the information that I have received, is there are a few activists coming out who are like, preserve karnu parcha bhanera, they have started to work on it, document karnu parcha. Because if you go to National Museum, the first thing is, one whole line is Simrangarh Bhagwanharuko आउँछ सबै त्यहाँ. And another interesting part is when I went to National Museum of New Delhi in India, so Simrangarhको मूर्ति र बिहारको मूर्तिहरू चाहिँ they are very similar. So and it's an open border there. So there have been cases, apparently there have been cases कि थाहा हुँदैन कहाँबाट चोरी भएको, because it looks the same. India can say that it's theirs because it's very similar. And Kathmandu र Simrangarh एकदमै डिफरेन्स छ, थाहा पाइहाल्छ. But त्यहाँको चाहिँ differentiate गर्न गाह्रो हुन्छ. And it's not late, but it can get too late if you don't start working on it. And even Jumla Singja Valley ko pani, I believe UNESCO ko tentative list ma cha, but I don't know how far that has gone because everyone is in Tilora Court. Final stage ma pugeko cha हैन. So I hope that Jumla ma pani there are Manang Mustang ma they're working on it, thankfully. Simrangarh ma there are few people working on it. So Jumla ma चाहिँ there were news Karnali ma चाहिँ एकदमै बढी चोरी भइरहेछ भनेर. And Department of Archaeology they know about it. Police pani, Nepal police also, they know about it. They've been working on that part. But yes, अहिले चाहिँ things are getting better. But Kathmandu, now if you ask me, Kathmandu Valley ko matra किन यस्तो बढी छ is because the scholars, because Kathmandu Valley matter was very open, or I would say accessible कि राम्रोसँग document भयो. Ali, I would say over-research भयो Kathmandu Valley in comparison to other parts of Nepal when we talk about heritage. So अहिले चाहिँ जति पनि फर्किरहेको छ अरू ठाउँको पनि छ, डोल्पोको छ, बट अब चाहिँ बिस्तारै बिस्तारै रिसर्च चाहिँ अलि एक्सप्यान्ड गरेपछि चाहिँ अरूको पनि फर्किन्छ होला. बट अहिले चाहिँ थ्याङ्क्स टु लस्ट आर्ट्स अफ नेपाल द्याट हामीले अल्सो अर्को पार्ट आई वुड लाइक टु एम्फसाइज, वी नट आस्किङ फर एभ्रिथिङ ब्याक. जुन प्रोभन स्टोलन छ यो चाहिँ चोरी भएको यो ठाउँबाट इन सिटु फोटोग्राफ्सबाट चाहिँ ओके यो चाहिँ यो ठाउँबाट रहेछ है. एन्ड वेन वी हेभ द डकुमेन्ट्स रेडी यो चाहिँ कन्फर्म हो भनेपछि वी आस्क फर इट. वी नट आस्किङ फर एभ्रिथिङ ब्याक बिकज युनेस्को कन्भेन्सन हामी वी अबाइड बाई 1970s कन्भेन्सन, वी अबाइड बाई युनिड्रोइड कन्भेन्सन. यति धेरै कन्भेन्सन छ त्यो सबै फलो गरेर ल फलो गरेर नै वी आर आस्किङ फर इट ब्याक. बट इफ भलन्टरीली these museums want to send it back, we're not going to say no.
Swosti?
You know, when these cultural objects are lost, and most of them are objects that were being venerated, we not only lose the gods and goddesses, but we lose a culture. Because जुन त्यो दोलखाको भैरव मास थियो त्यो त उहाँहरूको त्यो गुठी नै बन्द भइसकेको थियो, you know, because the mask, the main deity of veneration was lost. So we lose a lot of our culture also, the continuity of our culture. And then once we lose the continuity, it stops, and then the younger generation forget, and then the next generation, they don't even know that such things ever existed. So it's a very prime thing that we as individuals, we not only those aware, but we have to also share it with our young children and the young generation to be aware of this concept of illicit trafficking and stolen objects and how we can ourselves protect our heritage.
So I completely agree with what you have to say. हामीले चाहिँ के पनि हेर्नुपर्छ कि what are we leaving for the future generation behind. एन्ड अहिले यस्तो जेन्ट्रिफिकेसन भइरहेको छ एन्ड कति कम्युनिटिजमा त हामी गयो भने यो तपाईँको मूर्ति तपाईँको कम्युनिटीको मूर्ति हो भने पनि कतिजना थाहा नै हुँदैन बिकज द ओल्डर पिपल आर नो लङ्गर देयर. द्याट्स द्याट. एन्ड देन हामीले लिभिङ हेरिटेज इट्स भेरी इम्पोर्टेन्ट द्याट हाम्रो लिभिङ हेरिटेज हो बिकज बाहिरको म्युजियममा गयो भने इट्स एन आर्ट बट फर अस दिज आर हाम्रो देवी देवता हो, हामीले पूजा गर्ने हो होइन. अब जुन अब जति पनि फर्केको छ मूर्तिहरू, इफ यु गो टु छाउनी म्युजियम यु लुक एट इट एज आर्ट. त्यो अहिले रिप्याट्रिएसनको साइड गयो भने पनि. बट देन जब त्यो कम्युनिटीमा फिर्ता लिएर जान्छु विथ अल द शेबाङ, त्यो पछि चाहिँ एन्ड देन त्यो टिका लाएर पैसा चढाएपछि या you know anything
जीवन्यास फेरि कन्सिक्रेट
गरेपछि चाहिँ आई थिङ्क देन इट बिकम्स समथिङ एल्स. एन्ड हाम्रो र अरूहरूको डिफ्रेन्स चाहिँ के हो इज इट्स स्टिल अ लिभिङ हेरिटेज बिकज फर इन्स्टेन्स इन अफ्रिका अहिले बेनिन ब्रोन्ज हेज टेकन ओभर एभ्रिवेयर. बट if you ask people in Benin Republic or Nigeria, do they want it back? Because at the end of the day, कि मान्छेहरूले what do the people think about it? Because media massive reporting भएको छ, do people want it or not? And do people want it or not भन्दा नि oh it has to go back, it is the right thing to do, yes. But at the end of the day त्यहाँको मान्छेहरूको पर्सपेक्टिभ चाहिँ खासै निस्केको छैन. जब कि हाम्रो कन्ट्रीमा or I would say even हवाईमा त these are all जति पनि repatriation भएको these are of human remains. For them मैले I had a fortunate opportunity to attend one of the repatriation ceremonies in Vienna, a National Museum of History, and we were asked to wear funeral clothes. So black clothes laera gae the hami, and then you know people were crying from Hawaii हाम्रो ancestors-को हो. It's like you looking at your ancestors naked, in the museum. हामीलाई त केही feel नहोला. But for them, when we look at our gods in museums, we feel like, oh, this is हाम्रो, how can they put it out there? But for them, उनीहरूको ancestors. And it feels really bad. And they were crying. They were really crying out there. It did feel like a funeral. And त्यहाँ गएपछि के गर्छौ भन्यो then they bury it. So for us, हाम्रो circle of repatriation is that it goes back to the community and it's celebrated. And for them, it's like त्यो human remains-हरु चाहिँ it has to be buried and then उनीहरूको आत्मालाई शान्ति पाउँछ भनेर.
That's a quite a wonderful thought to end this podcast on. Thank you so much. That's a very, very interesting way of looking at heritage, of thinking about heritage. I think if you're listening to this, here's a plea. I mean, go visit our museums, and not just the ones in the Darbar squares. I would highly recommend Itumbaha, the Changunarayan Museum that has an excellent collection of coins going back as far as the Lichavi era. Engage with our heritage. As Alisha said, it's living heritage. It is what we are made of. It is how we tell our stories. And thank you, Swosti and Alisha, for what has been truly a learning experience. If you like the podcast, we invite you to listen to our other episodes. Do send us your comments.
If you have any feedback and suggestions, write to us at ukalosamvad@gmail.com. ukalosambaad@gmail.com. This podcast was recorded at the Ukaalo studio. The show's production and creative team includes Kritik Shrestha, Kiran Dal, Richa Thapa, and Amod Pyakurel. Original music by Dr. Dhruvesh Chandra Regmi. Samvaad is an Ukaalo presentation.